What if I told you you could finally get that home you've been looking at and dreaming about for years now? And on top of that, with a lower payment than what you probably expected. Well, the only catch, because it probably sounds too good to be true, is that you have to pay that mortgage for the next 50 years. So what, you still want it? Yes or no? Well, that's what I'm going to be talking about this week, because I don't know if you missed the news recently, but Trump's pushing the idea of coming out with a 50-year mortgage to address this whole affordability crisis that I've been talking about now for the last 2 years. And of course, it came with some mixed reviews from both sides. And I'm going to be talking about that later in this episode, but also talking about whether or not this is a realistic solution and if this could actually help out people like you, people like me who have been sitting there and looking at these rates, looking at these home prices, looking at the lack of inventory and asking ourselves, what solutions are there? What are they actually going to come up with to help address these problems? Or is this divide just going to keep growing and growing and growing? Now, who's going to benefit from this type of idea? It's another thing I'm going to be talking about, because like I said, it may sound good up front, but when you look at it and you ask yourself, okay, how long am I going to be shackled to this loan? You may not be the one winning in the long term. So let's get into it. And we'll be back in 3, 2, 1, we gone. Welcome back, family, to another episode of the First Sip Podcast. I'm your host, Dekimbe Smith, and this week we are sipping on some good old H2O, some water, because I started a 50-day challenge this week, and I told a couple of my friends, my dad, my brother, a couple of people are doing it with me, but I wanted to kind of end this year out on a strong note, really go into the new year feeling good, feeling strong, like I said, feeling healthy, mentally clear, and not wait until the new year to start that. So I put together a few items, right? It kind of follows the 75 hard plan. If you are familiar with that, it's kind of like the same things that you're going to be doing, right? So 2 workouts, drinking a gallon of water, sticking to a diet, reading, and taking a progress picture, right? And I'm also focusing on some other things, right? Like business wise, but those are the main bullet points that I'm going to be focused on for the next 50 days. And like I said, drinking water is a part of them. So staying hydrated, making sure I'm feeling right so we can get through this episode. But today we are here to talk about the new plan that came out from the Trump administration about the 50-year mortgage. And like I said, unless your head has been in the sand the past couple of days, you probably saw something about this, but you may not have dove into it and really seen, okay, well, what's going on here? Is this actually going to be happening? Or is this just an idea that was thrown out there? So let's start off with it, right? Because like I said, it's been trending this past week, and I really want to, like I said, dive into it, keep you up to date. So Trump came out with this idea for the 50-year mortgage and said pretty much, this can help buyers who have been sitting out there, who have been waiting, for something to help them get a lower monthly payment, to maybe help them get their foot in the door to be able to buy their homes. And like I said, they've been looking at the interest rates and realizing, okay, that's not moving fast enough. And at the same time, home prices continue to go up. So what do I do? Well, what if we extended the time period, right, on that loan that you're going to be paying? Instead of a 30-year mortgage like everybody's been used to, we're going to extend that out for another 20 years, right? We're going to make that a 50-year mortgage. And when you look at that, it's like, okay, well, a lower payment. I can buy that home now because it's actually something I can afford, right? It's going to save me a couple $100s a month. And that is what was holding me out before. And I don't have to wait. And then especially on top of that, when you add the fact that most people don't live in their homes for more than 8 to 9 years, right? People tend to move. They don't live in their home for 30 years. So I know you might see the idea of a 30-year mortgage and say, oh, well, everybody's doing that. Most people do not, especially first-time home buyers, right? You're probably going to buy that home, live in it, and then you're going to hit the next phase in your life and say, okay, time to move. And that's something, right, that I'm considering too when I'm looking at this and saying, okay, well, if people are able to get their foot in the door at a lower monthly payment, and especially if they're not going to be locked into this for the full 50 years, is it really that bad of a deal? And when you look at it that way, and if that is your plan, right, to maybe just get in there and say, okay, I know I'm going to be moving soon, then it may work out for you. But this is one of those things, like I said, everybody's situation is so different. So you really have to take those conversations a step further and say, okay, what does my long-term plan look like? Right? Because on the other side, if you are going to be there for the length of it, this is where things start to get crazy and where I wanted to dive into the numbers and really ask myself and say, okay, well, let me get out of my head and really see what this really breaks down to so I can get a better understanding, right, of what the real impact would be for somebody like myself if I was to buy that home and say, well, maybe I do want to hold on to this for the next 50 years and pass it down to my kids. So What does that look like? So I was doing a little research and I stumbled on this article from NPR. And one of the questions they asked was, how do the numbers look on a 50-year versus a 30-year mortgage? Now, using a $400,000 home with a 6.25% interest rate and a 10% down payment as an example, Realtor.com senior economist Joel Berner said a 50-year loan would save at most about $250 per month compared to the 30-year loan. Now, of course, once again, that helps buyers in the short term, but in the long term, it can definitely mess you up. And let's take this a step further. Now, when you're looking at the total amount that you'd be paying on that lifetime of a 50-year loan, it said the total interest on the 50-year loan would amount to $816,396 compared to $438,156 on the 30-year loan. A difference of $378,240. That's 86% more interest over the life of the loans. Now, once again, I know people are going to say, oh, well, I don't plan on being there that long. I'm going to maybe refinance, or do something different over that time. Of course. But when we're throwing things like this out there, one of the main things that I sit back and ask myself, I'm like, is this really even, a solution, or is this something to kind of just keep, like I talked about a couple weeks ago, is this something to kind of just punt the ball a little bit further down the field, so we don't have to really address the main issue, right? Like, let's just keep kicking it down a little bit further, right? Like we'll eventually get to the real issue, which is the lack of inventory, right? And I'm going to get into that a little bit later. But like I said, when you're looking at how much you're going to be paying for the length of that loan, that's a significant amount of money that you could be putting towards other things, right? Whether that be, saying like, well, maybe I could take that money and invest it somewhere else, or do other things with my life, right? Go travel, do other things with my family, my friends. That's a lot of money. You may not see it immediately, but like I said, it shows up there when you finally look back and say, okay, what was the opportunity cost on that? Oh, well, just $816,000 compared to $438,000. It's a lot of money. A lot of money. Now, like I said before, this definitely is going to help those buyers who have been sitting there and waiting and saying, okay, well, I'm not seeing any other changes. So if I can get a lower payment some way, somehow, let me go ahead and grab that opportunity now, and then I'll figure out later, right? But then on the backside of that, now if sellers who have also been holding out and saying, okay, well, I know demand, people aren't really, I'm not able to, really get that same price that I might have been able to get 2-3 years ago. So let me hold out. So now they see a whole new wave of buyers enter the field. What are they probably going to do? Most likely, you're going to continue to see those prices continue to go up and up and up, and push that demand further to the point of just breaking everything, right? Like I said, where you get to a point of a divide where the first time home buyer doesn't have even more affordable homes to look at, right? The pool is continuing to dry up and get smaller and smaller and smaller, instead of doing what I think we need to be doing, which is adding to that inventory, right? These are things that have come in forms of, like I said, I've talked about before with opportunity zones, right? That we saw before, especially in Trump's last administration. And that was a great thing when it comes to the amount of development and areas that started to see new construction that didn't see them before, right? Because now you're giving tax abatements, 10-year periods to developers, builders, house flippers, people who are able to go out there and say, okay, well, I'm going to add to this inventory, add to the supply because it wasn't here before, instead of just making up different financing methods, right? To just get people in without, like I said, actually addressing the main problem, which is that shortage of 4 million homes. And that's the thing, once again, when I sit back, I'm just like, why is nobody talking about this? Especially like, just the other day when I was talking about, with Mamdani when he was elected, one of the big things that, people are looking forward to is the rent freeze on affordable homes. And if you ever read anything about like New York real estate or like understanding what's going on there, it also has the same issue when it comes to affordable housing. But they also have a ridiculous amount of people, right? Like I think they have over like 300,000 homeless people just in New York City. And when you look at that, these are people who, if there was affordable housing, they'd probably be able to go ahead and qualify for those types of homes. So instead of creating ways of, making more housing, we say, let's just freeze the rent. And I'm like, I get it, because things are ridiculously overpriced in New York, right? I have family who lives in New York. I myself was born in Brooklyn. I know what those prices look like. I've done rentals in New York. It is ridiculous, right? But at the same time, I'm like, this is not going to solve the problem 4 years from now, 5 years from now, right? Once the whole hype of this is all done and over with, people are going to be back to the same position they were right now, where it's like, wait, prices haven't come down. If anything, they've gone up. And I don't have that many options to look around at, right? It's the same stuff that was still here before. And if anything, the condition of these places have now gone down. So now what do we do, right? The problem continues to get worse, and we're not addressing the main issue, which is how do we incentivize builders? How do we get more people into this field to build homes, to build developments around the country in these spaces that really need them, right? Not in the random corners of the country where, let's be honest, people probably aren't going to move to, right? How can we build places right on the outskirts of these major cities, right? So people can go ahead and say, okay, oh, look, there's a new town popping up here. Like I've talked about before with, places like King of Prussia, Phoenixville, those areas where you see new construction that has boomed, and now you see new life that has come to those areas right outside of a major city like Philadelphia. And when I sit back and think of those things, I'm like, okay, like I'm going back to the question again, why isn't there more conversation around that? And one thing I usually stumble on when I'm asking that question and doing some research, okay, about like, why don't these things happen, is zoning issues, right? And that's the part where people, I think, don't talk enough about, or aren't maybe, pointing the magnifying glass to really see like, okay, what's going on over here? Because when you see how much just, how many roadblocks and just time is wasted when it comes to zoning conversations or zoning changes, especially with a lot of these states and these local towns, it'll answer your question very quickly about, okay, well, why don't we have more changes in these areas and more development? People don't want it to happen in their area, right? Once you do finally get your home, you get your little piece of land and thing, you own it. Do you really want a whole bunch of other people to come move into your place, right? And say, okay, let's all now try to fit into this space. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's probably how most people are going to feel, right? You worked hard to finally get your piece of land, and now it's like, okay, wait, no, now I'm losing more and more and more of that free space that I thought I was buying into. And that's the fear that people hold on to, right? And I get it. Trust me, I live in a city where it is so congested that you get such peace the second you get a little bit of space away from anybody. So I can only imagine how it is, right, being out in certain places of the country where you have your space, you have your land, and now you're just seeing houses popping up everywhere. And now you're seeing more and more cars and more traffic. And, and it just brings a whole bunch of a different life, a different speed that you may not be used to. And that is the thing that we are constantly fighting against, but it's like a silent fight, right? Nobody really talks about it, like I said, but trust me, there's a whole name for that community where they call them NIMBYs, right? Not in my backyard. Those people who go out there, like I said, they talk about like, oh yeah, we need, to solve this problem, blah, 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 blah. And then you say, hey, what do you think about us building 100 homes, maybe a half mile, in this area because there's just available space? Oh no. Think about how much traffic that's going to cause, on the roads in the morning, and to get to the schools. And how are we going to maintain that? Right. And that's the part where reality hits, where it's like, okay, the ideas sound good, but are the people willing to change and do what's necessary to make the change? And like I said, that's where I just realized after researching and looking at this enough, it is just a constant cycle that goes back and forth. And I don't think there's enough people being loud enough about it and being like, yo, we need to push for these zoning changes. We need to push for incentives for the builders so they actually have a reason to go out there and build, right? You're not going to go and build if you know you're not going to make money from it. They're not running nonprofits. They're not doing charity business out here, right? And like I said, they have a business to run. So why would they do it if they know it's not going to be beneficial for their bottom line? So how do we create methods? How do we create ways, policies, right? Different, like I said, things like the opportunity zones, the tax abatements that we saw before, to encourage them to go back out there and do it. These are the things that I think that we should be talking about. But instead, we're talking about, hey, you know what I got for you? A 50-year mortgage. Instead of the 30-year that you were waiting on, no, I'm going to add on an extra 20 years on that. And if you're my age, 32, and if you were to get that this year, that means you would be paying it until you are 82. And when you look at that and ask yourself, sweet Jesus Almighty, is that even ownership, right? Because at that point in your life, what can you do? Like I said, you're going to look back on it, and after you done paid $800,000 in interest, right, plus the $400,000 in principal, you're going to be like, wow, was it really worth it? What could I have done with that money? What opportunities did I miss out on because I had to pay this payment for the lifetime of it? And I think that's, like I said, where you see a lot of people who start getting worried about this long-term idea about home ownership. Is it still really the American dream and something that people are going to be able to achieve within a reasonable time in early adulthood, right? We already see the age of the first time home buyer getting pushed back more and more and more. And once again, life is different. Maybe people should wait a little bit longer to step into home ownership when you can really afford it, when you're finally settled down in different phases. But at the same point, what factors are contributing to it being pushed back further and further, right? Is it really a matter of our personal decisions or a bigger systematic problem that isn't being addressed and that isn't being talked enough about? Like I said, these are things that I like to sit there and kind of, dive into, read about, and bring to you guys and see what you're thinking about. I love whenever somebody reaches out to me like, yo, I was reading, listening to this, listening to your podcast, and I had the same thought, blah, blah, blah. I love keeping the conversation going, seeing what you guys are thinking about it, because like I said, when I see news like this, sometimes I do also realize that maybe you aren't paying attention to this kind of stuff, or maybe it missed your radar because of all the other craziness that's going on in the world. Lord knows there's not a shortage of it right now, right? So when I sit back and see these things, I'm like, okay, this is a good piece of news. Let me bring it. It falls right in line with everything else that we talk about here on the show. So let me see what you guys have, what your opinions are on it. Let me see if you think this is a good solution, a bad solution, because like I said, we've seen from pretty much both sides. I don't think many people think this is a good solution. And even what's his name, Pulte, came out and said that, you know what, we heard you. This isn't a finalized deal or finalized solution policy that's going to be put into place. It's just something that we're thinking about on the long list of other solutions that we have for you. So I'm going to take him at his word, right? I have nothing else to go with, but I know he's a real estate minded person. He's worked in real estate for, I'm pretty much sure, like all of his entire life. So when I see somebody like that in the position, I'm like, okay, hopefully he's not just, focused on the big time investors, but also worried, like I said, on the regular guy, like mom and pop, who are sitting there and also sitting around saying, okay, when are we going to get a turn to get into, like I said, that American dream of home ownership? So let me know what you guys think. I'm going to keep diving into this and keeping you updated if anything else changes. I do also want to talk about, I'm going to have a lender come on and talk about what was going on recently with that change with Fannie Mae, because they dropped the credit score requirement on their loans. So that is actually a big thing. And it's also stirring up, a lot of questions and conversations. So I'm going to connect with my lender and see when we can get an episode in, to talk about that, hopefully within the next couple of days, maybe the next week. And yeah, we'll bring that to you so you can stay informed, make some plans going into the new year. Like I said, right now, this is filming around November, but hey, this is where we're at. So until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and as always, enjoy your first sip.